This evening, we're really happy to be interviewing Alice Howard and her family as a part of a Valley Historical Project. And I, Harriet Blockus, will be the interviewer, and Ken will do the filming. The date is January 20, 1999, and we're at the Elgin Public Library. We want to thank you all for granting us this interview. The material will be used to interpret the heritage of our region. It'll be used mostly for educational purposes, but it also might be for promoting economic development and tourism. And we're going to start with this family roundtable. We'll start with the mother, Alice. And Alice, will you tell us your name and where you were born, and when, and who your parents were, and grandparents?
Well, my name is Alice Rosina Howard, and my parents were Martin and Annie Hansen. I was born January 1st, 1915, in Clayton County, Marion Township, on a farm at home. And Dr. Fothergill was my doctor from Elgin. And he's the one that brought me here. So, and anyway, my grandparents, Tom Hansen came from Norway, and he married a girl from down what we call the Dutch Bottom, and she was from Switzerland. And then my other parents were both born in Switzerland, and that was Rosina and Chris Meyer. I don't know the dates of their birth because it was a long time ago. They were born in Switzerland, all these three.
So you have a Swiss and a Norwegian.
Yes, I have one. So I call myself 3/4 Swiss and 1/4 Norwegian. And I went to country school, and that was in Clayton County.
Why don't we just stop there and you can introduce your children?
Okay. And I was married to Archie Howard. I didn't tell you that. We were married at the Little Brown Church, and I lost him to cancer several years ago. And I have 4 children, and on my right is Beverly Alice, and on my left is Roger, Archie, isn't it? And then my oldest daughter is Shirley Ann. She lives in Waverly. And I lost my youngest daughter to cancer, who is Ann Bodensteiner.
Okay, then let's just take a little time, and Bev, you want to tell a little bit about yourself?
I was born in Fayette County in 1937, where I grew up on the farm. It was called the Sheep Ranch. I don't think anyone ever remembered there being sheep there, but that's what they called it. It's the Swiss, it's through the Swiss, what do you call it?
The Swiss Lakes?
Swiss Lakes Road. You want some of my childhood memories, or do you want me to?
Not yet.
Okay, you just want me to tell about my family.
Just tell about who you married and your children.
Okay, this is my husband, Kenneth Strong. We have 4 children: Chris, Carol, Janet, and Linda. And they're all married, and we have 13 grandchildren.
Very good. Now, Roger, would you do the same? Tell about.
Okay. I was born in Fayette County on September 23rd, 1939, at home. I think that's right.
At the Sheep Ranch.
At the Sheep Ranch, the same place. And I married Doris Meinhardt, and we have 4 children, and oldest is Mark, and he lives here just probably a mile from where we live. And Karen lives in Portland, Oregon, and Lisa lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Becky lives in Flagstaff, Arizona. We have 5 grandchildren.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to the education, and we'll kind of do the same thing. We'll start with Mother Alice telling about her education, and then we'll let, if you want to tell about what Shirley did,
Okay.
Where she was and then Beth, okay?
Well, I went to country school, which was at Clayton County District Number 8. And it was a large schoolhouse. There was 30-some pupils for a country school, and so they divided it in two, and we had 2 rooms, 2 teachers. And then I went on to high school in Elgin, and then I took a normal training course at Upper Iowa and taught school, and then later on I took some more courses to keep up my certificate.
How long did you teach?
Just 1 year. Well, then I taught in my husband's place because he wanted to farm. So then I finished out his year. And then later I got my substitute certificate, and then I did a lot of substituting. I think that was in the 1960s, if I remember.
And you did quite a number of years of that?
Yes, I did.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I had fun. I really enjoyed it. I think I did some for Harriet.
I think you did too. If I remember right. Okay.
And as far as my education, I guess I took a writing course in Iowa City at the university.
And we'll want to talk more about
Okay.
that when we get into your writing phase.
Okay.
You know, I can still remember some of the materials that you and Dad had from teaching,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we played with them, you know, pictures and papers. Do you remember that, Roger?
Not really, I guess. I was a lot younger than you.
Oh, yeah.
Bev, you want to tell
I must have used them all up.
Yeah, I think you did.
You wore them out.
Yeah.
We always played library at our
Yeah.
house.
Mm.
So, would you like to tell about where you went to school?
We didn't get to go to country school. There weren't enough children there, and the buses started probably that year, and we got to ride to the bus on the buses. So we went to kindergarten through 12th grade at the Elgin school.
Now
I think
that's-
I skipped first grade, went from kindergarten to second grade.
I think you did.
Yeah. Mom must have taught me to read. I don't remember it.
Yeah. I taught well, Shirley especially, she was so shy when she first went to school, and she had trouble reading, and so then I taught her how to read, and then she read practically all the time.
So now you went to school in the old edition, the first edition of the Elgin School that was built in the 1870s. And then you went there after the gym was built on, right?
Yeah, it was the way it was before
The
they
gym
tore it
was
down.
on there when I went to school.
Oh, it was on there when
Oh,
you
yeah.
were? Okay.
Because I played basketball, and
Girls basketball.
yeah.
Did you play with all the Lockas?
No,
You were younger.
I was with Hilda Wolf, and hardly remember who all was on there, but Betty Light, and I used to be Betty Kohler, and different ones. I was a freshman, and I had never been in that school. I'd never been in a high school before, and I just felt like I was in a foreign land. When I had to go to the bathroom, I had to make sure that I remembered where I came from, so I'd be sure to get back up to where I started. And I know my father, the coach was, can't remember her name, but she drove out and asked my dad if I could play basketball, because she'd watched me play kickball on me. And it was during the Depression, and I thought it was really generous of them to let me do this. And so I got on the team then right away, and it was so much fun.
You had certain areas that you had to,
Yeah, we were really confined.
I mean, they divided the floor off and you couldn't go
Uh-huh.
out of your area, and it wasn't just half and half, right?
Oh no, there was three different jump and running. Center was in the middle, and of course I was a guard, and so there's 2 forwards and 2 guards at each end, and so the tip-off was in the middle, and so it was my job to keep the ball from getting to my opponent.
Okay, why don't we move over, Kenny, would you like to tell where you went to school?
Well, I went to rural country school. It was located right across the road from where Roger lives now. And I was born and raised just about a quarter of a mile west of that. So I didn't have to walk very far to school. And I went to country school until the 8th grade, and then I went to West Union for school. Our farm, all west of there, really was kind of the dividing line between Elgin and West Union. But then after the consolidation, I was graduating again. But my younger brother Art, who was 2 years behind me, finished 2 years in Elgin. And my younger sister then went to Elgin.
Roger, do you want to tell us a little bit about where you went to school?
Yeah, I went from kindergarten through 11th grade at the old Elgin school. And then we were the first class to graduate from Valley. That was 1958. And
Were you on that football team?
we were on the football team before that.
Okay.
So we took a little bit of credit.
Good. So
I
that,
remember it was pretty exciting to go to the new school. I know some of the kids that went up in the summer and interviewed, they had some kids sat around at the library in different spots and talked about the school, but to most of us, you know, when we got there, that was the first time we walked in. And
was it exciting to think of yourself as having a whole building of your own compared to sharing it with elementary and junior high?
yeah, and then not traveling back and forth so much either, because we always did that traveling back and forth between Claremont and Elgin for different classes. So all our classes were right there. And Diane Frieden was the first girl to make a basket in the gym, and I was the first boy in the boys' game. So I didn't make very many, but I made that one.
Your picture was on the front of the yearbook, like you're opening the door to the new school.
Well, I was editor of the annual, but I didn't do much with it. But I was talking about playing basketball, playing in the old Elgin gym, and I just remember there were so many people in there that sometimes they would set them along the chairs along the side, and sometimes you'd dribble off somebody's foot when you're coming down the floor, you know. I think Kenneth would probably remember that, but it was quite a change.
Now, do any of you want to talk about any education beyond high school?
Well, I just wanted to add something though, because both of these fellows were really big in sports, and Kenny, I think, was a wrestling champion, and Roger.
Champion.
Oh, he's on the Hall of Fame at North.
Yeah.
Wonderful! Congratulations.
A few years ago,
I do feel privileged in that I was in high school at West Union when they started wrestling. And I also was on the school board at Valley when they started wrestling.
Wonderful.
Was Chris one of the first classes to start wrestling up there?
Well,
Or close
probably
to?
was.
It just seemed like he was one of the first ones. That'd be Kenny's son, Deb's son.
And I know you were in basketball and football and baseball,
Yeah, that was
and I was. We were just busy going from one thing to another, and Bev was in music, and so.
You know, they had started consolidating the classes even when I was in high school, because the band would come down and practice with our band. And the sports were starting to be together.
That was really something to put Wadena and Elgin and Claremont together, wasn't it? We had a lot of mixed feelings for a long time.
You know, something that was kind of fun when we were in grade school, we would always go down to Granny and Grandpa's for dinner. For lunch, we'd walk down there.
Now, which grandparents,
Howard. They lived in Elgin.
right?
And just today, I was at the cafe and they had graham cracker pie, and I was telling the rest of the people there, well, that was my favorite at Granny's house, and this isn't as good as hers.
Now let's see, Roger, I think did you go to Iowa State?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't go to college.
Oh, I thought you went to Iowa State.
No, I worked at Collins Radio about 9 months and then
Started farming?
started farming.
Okay.
And then it come time for him to go to college. We were just ready to sign the paper, and
You signed it?
he said no, he wanted to farm, so.
Okay. Would you like to talk about your church? We'll start with Alice.
Well, when I was a child, I lived in a neighborhood where I don't think anybody belonged to a church, because the churches were scattered here and there, and there was different nationalities and different. And I know there's a Lutheran church, and that was down below Skyans, what they called us. Highland Church, and there was a Elyria Church and a church in Elgin. And so, and then my grandmother belonged to an apostolic church. So once in a while, to please her, we went to the apostolic church, where of course I didn't understand their language was German, so.
That would be that when the church was in the
In the
Dutch
country,
Valley?
yeah. Mhm. And then once in a while, we go up to Elyria and we go to Sunday school there. And then we go down to this Lutheran church down in the country there. And so after we were married, there was a minister from the Elgin Methodist Church came out, a young man. His name escapes me right now.
Oh, Jones.
Yes, Reverend Jones, and he was my Archie's age, and they just got along real well. And so then we joined church, and Shirley and Bev and Roger, we all joined then. They were baptized, and then there were many people. I think they were all the churches were scouring the country. And Lutherans picked up all the Lutherans, and we had many. I think there must have been between 30 and 40 that joined church that time.
Wow, that would make all of us feel good if we could have that many
Yes,
join our
yeah.
churches now.
So,
And Bev, you want to tell about what church you're affiliated with?
We go to the Elyria Community Church, and it was Kenny's church from the time he was a child. And we have a Methodist minister, so I'm still a Methodist, I guess.
So you share the minister.
Share a minister.
Between the Elgin Methodist and the Elyria.
Yeah.
Kenny, do you have anything you want to say about?
Well, I can add to that.
All right.
I remember Sunday school at Elgin, and Nora Klingman was one of the teachers. I remember her, and Gladys Feller.
You would want to add anything, Roger?
Yeah, we always went to the Methodist church, and our family goes to the Methodist church now.
I remember I belonged to the ladies, we called it the Ladies' Aid at the time. There's Women's Society of Christian Service, and at that time we were money makers for the church. I mean, the Methodist women were always cooking for somebody, and so we had all the different organizations then and fed them for so much a plate. And I
Like
remember
the Lions Club.
Yes, and
Community
Club, and I just remember that we pounded many steaks. Fried them. I just remember pounding and frying steaks.
You people your families have lived here a long time, so I would like to ask, how many residents, how many houses have you lived in your lifetime? Alice, we'll start with you. How many have you lived in?
3, I think,
3.
yeah. And I think they've all been moved except the one that I'm living in now.
The sheep farm, and then where did you live as a child?
Oh, I lived down in Clayton County. That wasn't moved. But,
Okay, and then the sheep farm, and then in town?
There was a little house not far from where Archie's folks lived, and of course, I can't remember, it belonged to Adam Bowen, and we stayed in that for a year until we bought the sheep ranch. So we had the house at the sheep ranch. And that was moved, Lane Ash bought the house later years and moved it up the hill. And then that little tiny house that I was talking about first, the Reeders bought that. And then we moved up to the farm where the kids grew up in the Howard farm. And then when we moved, the Reeders bought that house. And so they're all moved.
And Bev, how many houses have you lived in?
I was just trying to count here. I think 5.
Well, you lived in quite a few then.
Well, the sheep ranch where I was born, and then we moved to the Howard farm. Then we were married while Kenny was in the Army, so we lived in Chicago a little while. Then I guess 6 farms. We moved to his home place and lived in an apartment. It was a big house. Then to what was known as the Dunnermuth farm. We lived there and then moved from there. We lived there 35 years and then moved to Kenny's grandmother's place where we live now.
So you have moved around
6.
more than...
Yeah.
Ken's only lived in one house. That's why I asked you. I thought maybe, Roger, have you moved as many times as she has?
Yeah, I
or-
think we've lived in 6 different places.
Okay. Then let's move on to tell a little bit. Now how long you've lived in this area? How long have you been here, Alice?
Well, since 1936.
And Bev and
That's
Kenny and you 3 have been here all of your lives.
Mhm.
Okay. You want to tell what your job is in life, Roger?
I'm a farmer.
And Alice, did you and your husband ever do anything besides farm?
Well, we both taught school,
Mm-hmm.
and of course a housewife.
Dad worked in Des Moines.
Yes. Before, he worked in Des Moines at International Harvester. He had just got a business, graduated from business school and got a job there. Well, then the Depression was hitting, and people were laying off. And he knew that he'd be one of the first ones laid off, and he taught school before that. And so he called home and said he was coming home. And at that time, it was very interesting getting a job for teaching school because you had to have somebody that was a director of a school in order to get a job, because there were many teachers, and there were so many teachers to each school that they wanted a job. And if you were related to the director of the school, well, you were have to have a job. And Archie's mother was director. And so, and then my aunt near Volga was director, and so I got that school.
It helps to
So,
have, it hasn't
yes.
changed any, has it?
But that was a lot of hard, it wasn't so much there, but there was a lot of places, you had to elect a director, so the people in the area voted on a director, and there was many hard feelings in other districts where
Bev, what jobs have you had?
Well, the first job I had was as a secretary for an insurance company in Cedar Rapids. And then when we were married, I worked for another insurance company in Chicago. And then I didn't work while the children were small, when we came back to the farm, except at home. So I guess when our youngest was a sophomore in high school, I worked for just a short time at Belmer's department store in West Union selling fabric. And then a job opened in the library at Valley High School. And then I worked there for 8 years. I think I was the only one they ever hired for library work until recent years. Then the next job I had was at the Decorah Library, and I worked there for 6 years. And the job at the Elgin Library was open, and I got that job, and I've been here for a little over a year.
Kenny, have you done anything, have you had other occupations besides farming?
Outside of 2 years in the Army, I've been trying to learn how to farm ever since.
Good for you, it's a big one. What about you, Roger? You mentioned that you once
Yeah.
worked.
When I got out of school in that fall, I went down to Cedar Rapids and worked at Conway Radio till the next spring.
And then you've been on the farm ever
Yeah.
since. Okay?
I remember him coming home and saying that, he wanted to farm. He said he didn't like to go to work when the sun was not up, and
We used to
it was
work.
dark when he went to work and dark when he quit.
Yeah, we used to work overtime, and then we'd start at 6:30 in the morning, and and it would be dark when we went in, and then the building was all darkened out because there was no windows, just for security reasons. So when we left at night, then a lot of times the sun was down, so you didn't know if it was cloudy that day or if it was clear that day.
Because there is 4 of you, I'd like to just think of maybe one major childhood event that sticks out in your mind that you'd like to share. Alice, you want to start?
Well, I guess I hardly know. There's been quite a few.
Just pick one.
I just remember, where we lived. We lived down, we had a long lane. And I always remember my dad was inventive, and so we had a long, steep hill to go down, so you had a swinging gate. So you drove down with your car, and you'd give it a nudge, and it'd fly open, and then you'd come back. And we could get through. A lot of people were hit by the gate when they came through because they came through too fast. And of course, my grandmother also lived with us, and she was Swiss. And so I sort of was her pal all the time, and my folks were busy working, I guess, and so I was following her around. Pretty soon I was talking nothing but Swiss.
Oh, so you were bilingual way back then.
Yes. And then my grandfather, who's a Norwegian that just lives up not very far, you could walk there in just a little bit. Well, he didn't think much of that, and I don't think they found much of each other either, and so.
Did he teach you Norwegian then?
No, he came down and talked to Dad about it.
Oh.
And see, I hadn't even gone to school yet, and he brought down the Decora Posten, which is the Decora paper, and he said, you got to read to her out of this paper, and you'll have to teach her how to read out of this paper. He said, she's got to learn how to talk Norwegian. So I don't think Dad paid much attention to him, but.
That's interesting. That's a nice conflict of ethnic thinking
Yes,
that we
it
haven't
is.
come into. I've asked him many times, but no one has told much about that. Deb, do you have any special childhood memory or toy that really sticks out in your mind?
Oh, I remember a toy. We got a doll. Shirley and I both got a doll. They were kind of alike, and mine was named Judy, and Dad wrote on it with fingernail polish the name across the doll. I wish I had that doll. I probably wore it out. But I think some of the best memories were going down to Granny and Grandpa Hanson's. Because we would go down there for a week, I think, and it was 10 miles away. That was too far to go home. So it seemed like quite an adventure, and we would stay a week. Because it was that far, you stayed a week. And it was just, it was like, it was kind of like the Waltons. It was just an amazing place. They had a spring house. I swear, if I'd go in there today and I'd shut my eyes, I'd know where I was, because Granny had soap. They made root beer. There was that's the way I could describe it. It was like the Waltons. We would go swimming in the creek.
Right, horses.
Yeah, they made they just made these wonderful things for us to eat. It was like they entertained us the whole time we were there. And we stayed in Gladys's room, and she had, as a little kid, she had this gorgeous.
So this was Grandma Hanson.
Yes, she had this gorgeous jewelry that we just loved, and we liked her bedroom, and it was just such a fun time.
That is special when your grandparents can take the time to just entertain you.
And Granny had these gorgeous flowers. They had a rock garden, a grape arbor. It was, Roger, you spent a week too, didn't you?
Yeah, we always went down. Everybody got to go for a week.
Isn't that the way you remember it?
Yeah, and I know Robert I always liked horses, but I hardly ever rode one. And then Robert would catch the work horses, and I just remember they were so wide that, and you didn't have a saddle on them, and he'd take off really fast, and I'd be hardly hanging on. The other horse, I just held on, and the other horse followed the other one, but I just remember we had a great time, and you'd reach down there was a big tank in the spring house that had their whole farm had spring water, so you'd reach down this cold tank and you could get a root beer down in there. And I just remember being in the house, and I would always go over, they had a sink in their house and the water came into the house, and I'd go over and turn the faucet off because it was running all the time. And they'd always kid me about that, because they said, well, you can shut it off if you want to, but the spring runs all the time. So you can leave it on or you can turn it off. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I remember living at home too, that was kind of impressive when I was small, that we had a neighbor that was, just lived up the creek, I guess, about 1.5 miles, and they had a son that was, I suppose when I was 5 or 6, he was probably 25, but he was retarded, and he smoked a pipe, and he would wear dairy boots, and he had a dark beard and a hat, and then he'd walk down, because Dad would light he wasn't allowed to carry matches, and so Dad would always light his pipe for him, and I know that Bev and Shirley would sometimes run if they seen him coming, but I'd always kind of be with Dad, and I'd stay there, and then he'd come down, and Dad would light his pipe, and he'd never say much, and then he'd go back home.
We got to take a little time out here.
For baccy, he was out of tobacco. He'd asked Archie for some baccy.
He always had a corncob pipe.
And then his mother, Elsie, wallpapered, and she was such a character. And you know, when I had Chris, she was into Halverson's store. Well, it was Baumgartner and Halverson at the time. I sat Chris on the counter and she said, "That's a Howard." And I said, "Well, this is my son." Well, she was so tickled because she recognized right away that he was related to the Howards. She was a character. She dyed her hair dark black, and she wallpapered all over the country. Mom used to say you had to have a new broom, and that's the way she wallpapered the ceiling.
I've heard of that, but
Yeah.
my mother didn't wallpaper that way. But Kenny, do you have any childhood memory that you'd like to share?
Well, I suppose in that same vein that between Christmas and New Year's, one of us 4 boys would go down to Uncle Ranald and Aunt Emma's, and one of their boys would come up to our house. We'd exchange one every year. That we always kind of look forward to.
If I would ask you, what was Saturday night like? We'll first start with Alice's mother, what it was like when she was little, and then the rest of you tell how it changed. Saturday nights in Elgin.
Well, it was a very special night because that probably was the only place we went all week. There was a special place to go. And of course, you know, there was street lights and I know we had a drugstore there and a soda fountain. And my dad and Rudy Milledauer is the one that owned the store, and they were good friends, and they'd visit. And then we'd sit by, they had ice cream chairs, and I don't know, you know what they look like, an ice cream table, wire chairs, and we'd sit there, and then we could have a sundae. And that was always a special treat.
How much did your Sunday cost?
I have no idea. I don't think it was much, because otherwise we wouldn't have had it. And then also there was a lady that was, I can't think of her name, but she was Mel Kohler's sister, and she was beautiful. Bess Housedanson, I think her name is. And anyway, she gave a demonstration. I was just a kid, and I was watching this. And she, of course, had a beautiful complexion. And she got out her creams and creamed her face and wiped it off and put on her makeup. And I just was really impressed. I thought that was just something.
She did this for the customers?
Yes. And so I think it was Pond's cold cream, and you know, and then we had Thomas Store also, which was a grocery store, a full had shoes and boots and groceries, and then of course Dad visited with him while my mother got the groceries, and there's where you had the bananas hanging from the ceiling and your candy things and sitting in front. And so it was just a matter of just going, and then I don't know if they had a popcorn stand then or not. I don't hardly think so. But it was just going to these places. And then there was an opera house. And then we did go to Chocola's once in a while. And I remember my dad buying boxes of candy because some people had just a good wristwatch inside. We didn't get any of those, but some people did. I think there might have been 1 or 2 wristwatches and hundreds of boxes. Only just, the rest of them all had little tokens in them.
Do any of the rest of you have memories of Saturday nights?
Well, I think Thomas' store probably hadn't changed much even when we were kids then, because they had the big rounds of cheese. We got our shoes in the back. I think it probably hadn't changed much since the time you were a kid. And then we used to ride with Grandpa Howard. He hauled the freight, and sometimes the cookies came to Thomas' store in boxes, square boxes, and they fit down into a rack. But once in a while there'd be a box that would just be all smashed. I suppose the freight had dropped them or something. So he'd get to take those home. Or they were going to throw them away. And sometimes Mr. Toma would give us a cookie. It was fun to go there.
Do you remember any band concerts?
Oh yeah, I played in the band concerts sometimes. I played a clarinet. There was the old Stone band. It wasn't a shell. It was round, and it was right in the middle of the park. It was a cement structure, wasn't it?
They have one in the Claremont Park.
Is it just one just like
Pretty
that?
much like that.
Okay.
That's what we played there. I think, was it Saturday nights maybe? Wednesday nights.
I think it was Wednesday nights.
Wednesday nights. But going to town on Saturday night was an event, because we'd dress up. And then we'd get ready kind of 1 at a time or 2 at a time, and then we'd go out in the yard, and we had to stay clean. So, but we could walk around and wait for the rest of them to come. One thing I remember about Saturday night was the first car that Dad got after the war. And if I remember right, you just had to take the car that came. You couldn't pick out a color or a kind.
They were all black anyway.
Yeah, well, this one, yeah. But it was a coupe, and it wasn't what he wanted, but you either took it or went to the end of the line. And we all fit in it. It was a 5-passenger coupe. There was 5 of us. But I still remember, Dad, you weren't ever supposed to brag about anything. But I could still remember how proud he was of that car. And we parked in front of Thomas' store that night. We must have gone early. I mean, that was the best place to park. And people came from all over and looked at that car. I think we were probably the first one to have a new car after the war. And it was quite an event. But he used to go up to Klein's in Claremont. That's where he got it. Once in a while we could go along, to be up there where those new cars were. Kind of exciting.
Was your husband that proud of that car?
Oh, yes. I remember the kids were always fighting to sit in the front seat, but
They still do that, don't they?
Did you ever sit in the back so they could sit in front?
I imagine, I think so.
Do you remember we used to sing once in a while, go into Elgin? Do you remember that? It probably drove you crazy. Like when you were about 8 or 10 years old, we'd sit in the back seat and sing.
That's better than
It was
fighting.
better than fighting, I was going to say.
Do you remember anything, Roger, about Saturday night special that sticks in your mind, either you or Kenny?
I think we used to come to town on Wednesday and Saturday night both, but I think Saturday night was the bigger night. And I remember I don't know what they call them, the holy rollers or what it was, and they'd stand there in the park, like a half a dozen, and one of them would preach. And sometimes people would be gathered around somebody, they would just go out their regular business. But and I remember Dad and Harley or Clive Helms and Bruce Ruffensberger sitting around the Toma store there visiting, and just, we'd bring eggs to town, I remember that.
You traded the eggs for the groceries?
Yeah, we'd bring a case of eggs, or, I don't know if that was Saturday night or Wednesday night, but
Whatever we,
yeah, we got enough to bring, I guess.
And then afterwards, we'd walk up to Granny and Grandpa Howard's.
Yeah.
If we were tired, we'd go up there.
She always had grape Kool-Aid and Spam sandwich.
Spam!
Or sometimes it was peanut butter. Remember, she had, and it was the darkest grape Kool-Aid. She must have put 2 packages in a quart of water. It was like black. It was so good.
Boy, that lunch.
But one time, I went up early, and Grandpa was up there, and we sat out on the front porch, and he said, I think we should have some ice cream. And I said, yeah, I think we should. And he said, it should be vanilla with chocolate on it. And I said, yeah, that would be good. And we just sat there and rocked. But for years after that, we'd lots of times go to Granny and Grandpa's for Sunday dinner, and he'd always say, well, this is good, but it wasn't as good as that ice cream Bev and I had that Saturday night on the porch. And you know, he said that so many times, I wasn't really sure whether we had it or not, but I don't think we did. We just talked about it.
You talked about it till you thought you had it.
Just about.
Okay.
You didn't go to Elgin Saturday night, though, did you?
Oh, yeah, sometimes. I think the thing that I remember most, and that I can remember first, is the different ethnic groups standing on the corners. You know, there'd be one group, to me there was just jabbering, but you know, the Norwegians would be on one corner, and that, you know, different groups, and not only in Elgin, we went to West Union quite a bit too, and it was the same there.
Talking a different language, yeah? I mean, talking their own native
In their
language.
own tongue, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to Wadena Saturday night?
No, not that I, no.
Because some of the people in Elyria talk now about that they used to go to Wadena on Saturday night.
I'll have to fill in for something for Shirley when staying down to Granny and Grandpa Howard's. There was May baskets, and I'd never heard of them before, and so we had May baskets, and so she made little May baskets with these things you make cupcakes out of. We put a handle on them and fill out the stuff on them, and so Grandpa Howard, he had his pickup, and so I went with her and Shirley, and we started putting May baskets around, and every time he hit a bump, he'd tip them. The May baskets would spill out, and we'd have to fill them back up again. And I think after we stood about the 3rd place, why he said, we're going home. Just forget it. We're going home.
Okay, I'd like to, there's some more things I want to ask, but I would like to get to your special areas, so we be sure and get those in with plenty of time. So, Roger, would you want to talk about changes in farming and machinery and size of farms?
Yeah, I can remember at home when Dad still had the horses. Not that we did much work with them, but I just remember them being there and being in the barn, and I think they did some haying work with them. But then Dad had a Ford Ferguson tractor, and I used to walk up. It was we kind of lived down in the bottom, and then you could walk up top of the hill, and I'd walk up there a lot of times and wait by a tree, and then when he got through, I'd get on, and I would be able to steer the tractor down where I thought I was anyway, down to the bottom. But yeah, it's really changed a lot. I don't know if for the better, but it seemed like every year you were forced either to do a little bit more, and the farms have changed and got bigger.
Your father's farm was how big that you grew up
It
on?
was probably 120 acres.
And that was the only farm he had, or was it, and how many acres do you have now?
We farm and rent about 3,000 acres.
A big change.
Yeah, big change.
And what kind of machinery came in that made this possible?
I think machinery that was a lot easier to work with, a lot more comfortable. I mean, they came with the cab tractors where we, you just set out in the open, and it was cold and it was wet and it was a lot more dangerous. And now I think with the tractors the last 15 years they're cab controlled, and the cab is climate controlled, and so you can do more work and not get so tired. And the equipment got a lot bigger.
Did electricity make a big difference?
Oh,
Can you remember
yeah.
the change?
I remember when we didn't have electricity on the sheep ranch, and yeah, I think, and I was pretty small when we got it, so I just kind of gradually grew up with it, so I didn't probably realize the biggest, that much of a change, but it was a major breakthrough in livestock production. And I know we farrowed, when I first started farming, I farrowed pigs, and Dad had made some corner hovers for the little pigs, and had heat for just a 100-watt bulb in them. And we went from that to farrowing stalls to slats, and now we're out of the hog business. We pretty much just cash grain and have a beef cow herd. I farm with my son. It's just pretty much Doris and I and Mark, and we hire a retired person. And so it's amazing that where 120 acres was a full-time job and probably a fairly decent living, now sometimes 2,000 or 3,000 acres is harder, it seemed like, to make with the ups and downs in the markets.
And your crops are mainly corn and beans?
Corn and beans and hay.
And hay. Okay. Kenny, would you like to tell us a little bit about how horses have changed in your lifetime from work to pleasure?
Well, I guess I always liked horses. Dad didn't have very good horses, and they were old. He did finally get a young, good team, but my older brother didn't much care for them, and somehow or other they disappeared one day. They were gone. But I always liked horses, so I guess it was in the mid-'80s. I went to Waverly at the horse sale, and I came home with a couple of sort of horses. They weren't too good, but we kind of got along with them for a little while, and then I got some of them maybe a little better.
And you have
Still trying to find good ones. As far as doing anything with them, I don't know. Bev kind of got me giving rides here in town once in a while. And that's pretty much what I do with them.
Sometimes you work with them.
Oh, sometimes I recade with them.
You know, you came
Depends
to,
how fast we have to get it done.
when we were celebrating the beginning of our 150th anniversary, you came and gave rides to our people at our church, so
Yes.
they could get the feeling, and little Clint Amundsen just loved that. He really enjoyed helping you that night.
Tell them about the barn on your grandpa's place, because he probably had horses in there, and now you do too.
Well, yeah. Well, the summer that I was 10 years old, my grandparents, well, they'd been hiring a boy to help just kind of chore in the summertime. And they were talking about it, and I said, well, I'll work for you. And so I worked there for 10 cents a day. And I got a quarter a day when we had to make hay, because I had to lead the horse on hay fork. That was a long time ago. When we moved over there, then the barn began to sag a little, and the mangers were broken. So I rebuilt all that stuff so I'd have a place to put my horses.
We're glad you did. Now, let's move to Bev. And do you want to, you were going to tell a little bit about the library here?
Well, it's a beautiful facility, and I feel really good about being here. It was a gift from Walter Kohler, a bequest. And I had nothing to do with the design or the building of it. I came here after they'd moved, but I still marvel at all they planned for this building. They must have done a lot of research.
Especially with the ICM.
Yeah, and the room we're in now is a classroom. It's an ICN classroom, one of the newest. Well, I think Iowa's a leader in that field. We have classes booked here half of February and March. Dates are booked already, and some into April and May. And it's a wonderful thing. There's 10 microphones. You sit at the table and you talk to the instructor, and they see you and you see the instructor, but you don't have to drive 100 miles to the class. And that's just one of the things. I was talking to a friend today about how it's kind of tough to be in your 60s and in a way have to learn this at this age, although it's been a few years, but still it's different when you learn the computer and the computer language as a child. And the internet and all that you can do, and you know, struggling with all the glitches with the computer. It's kind of tough.
Well, you do a fine job, and this is one of my favorite places in Elgin. It's like you went to Toma's store. I like to go to the library because there's so many things here that I enjoy. Would you like to tell about the barn tour, the connection with it?
Well, when I worked in Decorah, I did quite a lot of the public programming, and I had called or probably written to Tom Benson, who was at that time the publisher of Midwest Living magazine, and asked him if he would come and speak about barns, because that was a special interest of his. I didn't know that he had a farm at Ridgeway. It was just a few miles from Decorah, and he agreed to come at no cost, and he liked visiting his farm. But he talked about how barns were going to be lost, and that it was going to also be a new tourist attraction, and even for people in Europe, because we have a different kind of barn here. And he thought that, and I was sitting there thinking, you know, that's something we could do at home. There were other people there that had historic barns that talked about them. So I started to put it together, talked to Peggy Strong, my sister-in-law, and she helped. And Ruth Jacob she was already interested in barns and had written some things. So I sort of did the publicity and kind of the logistics of the whole thing. They did the history of the barns. And we started with just a few barns, and there were maybe a dozen people, the first one. I think the next one will be our 6th here, and we have around 200 people now that come to the barn tours.
Alice, well, we don't mean that we've been getting all these others, and now would you want to tell about when you first got electricity?
Oh, yes. When we moved to the sheep ranch, of course, there was no electricity. We had a new house, and it didn't have no electricity and no furnace, no water. But it was a new house. But Archie's folks had a wind charger on their house, and then REA came down through their road. They were sort of a main trunk that was our road hooked this road up to 56. We had a trunk that went through our place, and so, but they called them the REA that time. I think it's REC now, but they wouldn't come down through there to build a line. So it was quite a few years before we had electricity. So we had this little wind charger we put on top of the house, and I hated washing kerosene lamps, because my folks gave me all the kerosene lamps they had because they had Delco light, and so and then this wind charger gave us a light with one bulb, and so that meant one less lamp to wash, and it was really nice. It was a nice light, but we had, of course, we depended on the wind, and that it worked pretty well. And I don't know what else we did with it, but I think it was mainly that we had a light. And then finally, it said, I had written about it, says our little wind charger kept our radio and one light running through the next 9 years. And so we were 9 years without electricity. So that meant we had no refrigerator or a freezer or anything like that. And so it is in 1947 when all the men in the neighborhood decided that they would build a line down through there. The farmers would all work together and dig the holes, so. And and then the REA would come do the electrical wiring and the technical work and string the wire. And they said the holes would be 6 feet deep, and according to my brother, wide enough for a child to climb in and out of. And it was very hard work because they had to dig through bedrock down through there was where Slake's was. And said Roger remembers his dad using a crowbar and a sledgehammer, working away at the rock. And finally the rocks were dug and coming closer to our home. And so we just had weeks where we were just waiting for this. And I said I vividly remember the house flooded with light when I pushed the switch, and revealing some cobwebs up in the corner that I didn't know were there. And the kerosene lamps were put away, and we drilled a 120-foot well near the house in the barn, so we had electricity to pump our water. And we didn't need a faithful old spring that we had. The spring was quite a ways away from the buildings. We had to carry all our water. And I said it was wonderful to put the food in the refrigerator with the freezer on top to keep ice cream. And there was a yard light that shone all the way to the barn. And the lantern was retired, and now you could see lights shining through the barn windows. And the gasoline engines were taking place of the electric motors. And so, of course, the sad iron was replaced by the electric iron. The toaster was sitting on the countertop. I had a toaster. And then that fall, I sold enough broilers to buy a new electric stove. And so, says I don't recall whether I actually said hallelujah, but the joy was there when we set the coal and wood range down in the basement. The old leaky kerosene range that I used in the summer went to the ditch.
Were you taking some of those from one of your articles that you've written?
Yes,
because you have written for the newspaper, and you have a book. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that so we be sure and get it on the tape?
Well, I always was interested in writing, and I don't know how I got started, but I think it was after Archie passed away. We were living in town then, and I think it was in 1982, and I was looking out the window, and we had the most beautiful sunset that I'd ever seen. And so, things like that just really get me all, you could almost put me to tears when you see something like that, but I sat down and wrote about it. And then I decided to put a recipe with it, so Carol and Leon had the Echo at the time. That is my granddaughter and grandson. And so I went down and asked them if they'd be interested in a column with a recipe in it, because I noticed they didn't have any recipe columns, and said sure, they'd like to try that. And so I wrote ever since then. It's been since 1982, which has been quite a few years. There was a few spells in between where I didn't, took a little vacation, but
and then you put it together in a book?
Yes, and then I took some of the best and put it in a book. And that's about the time when my youngest daughter was very ill, and she got to see it before she passed away. But it was a great thing for her to see that this was done.
And
she was kind of my pusher.
And was she the one that got you to go to the writing class in Iowa City?
Yes. And she'd usually say, "Go for it, Mom," and so.
And so you would go for it.
Yeah, that's right. I would go for it. So then I had these, and I always thought about like to write or put a book together. And so this lady, there was a publisher in Iowa City, and sometimes it's hard to get published. And so I took some of my writings to her, and I was staying at Ann's place. I don't know just why I was staying there. I guess that's when I was taking this writing course. One of my instructors in the writing school told me that I should put my articles in a book. That's how I got started. Well, I didn't do that for another year, because I just thought, well, I really didn't think this was going to work. But finally I took the articles to this lady in Iowa City that has a publishing company, and she just, right away she said that she would do that. She thought this was good. And I know I designed the cover for it, and I just scribbled it on a piece of paper. And I just made a lot of little scribbles around the outside of it, and like an edging, and then sort of sketched what the middle was, as this country lady nibbling and scribbling. And so I showed that to her, and she said, "That's exactly what I want." And I said, "Well, you don't want that." And she said, "Yes, I do." She said, "It's nibbling and scribbling, and so you've scribbled and that's how it got started." And so we put it together, and then there was a printers, I think they were in Minneapolis, that put it together, bound it and put it together. And it is.
Some of your grandchildren and children did some of the drawings in it.
Yes.
I didn't know
And, well, Belle has some drawings, and
Becky.
yeah,
Becky
has
has drawing.
She drew
And Emily.
Becky drew the feather bed, and so and I tried to get everybody. I said there isn't anybody that can't draw something.
Right.
I tried after Roger, but I couldn't get him to draw anything. So I wanted him to draw a barn. But
We're getting toward the end, but I'd like
and
to
that-
ask one more question, and that will still be on this tape. Why, if you were going to talk to someone, what reasons would you give for them to come and live here in Northeast Iowa? Whoever wants to start on that. What is so good about Northeast Iowa that made you want to stay here?
Maybe you should ask us in the summertime.
You think this is a bad time to ask in January?
I think it's a great place to live. We always hoping our daughters that are away from here would move back to the Midwest, but probably won't happen. But it's a great place to raise a family, and I like the small towns, and most of the people, and it's just a relaxing place to live.
And I think we take the beauty of it for granted, grown up with it. But it isn't like this everywhere in Iowa. It's kind of a unique corner with the hills and valleys. That's why the Swiss settled here, I guess.
Okay, we can just keep on. Alice?
And I just love the beauty of it, and I like to be outdoors. I like to go to the woods. And of course, I was a picnic person. I always like to have picnics. And I would just always think how beautiful everything was, like it's almost unbelievable sometimes in the fall about how beautiful it is. And then some of my writings I would write in the paper telling people to look. Because I always had the idea that people were not looking at how pretty it was around here. But I imagine they were, but I want to make sure they did.
Good. Kenny, do you have anything?
Well, in that same vein, I belong to a driving club, a horse driving club, and always look forward to our fall rides. The scenery's so nice. Leaves are turning, the air is cool. It's just a beautiful time of year.
Well, it's about time to wind up, but there's still room on the tape. If anyone has something that we haven't shared that you want to tell. Ken's pointing to the pictures above your heads. You want to explain about those, Alice?
Well, I think Beverly can tell about these. She's the one that put them together. And
Oh, I gave them to the folks for Christmas, and then I think you probably didn't even get them hung. I think Dad died the next year, maybe, or the next spring. So we decided to put them in the library in Elgin, and I was about to ask someone who worked here, or tell them if they didn't want them to let me know I'd come and pick them up, and they said, "Oh, we've already hung them." So I got them framed, and I did the printing on them. I don't do calligraphy, but it's a, it's a form of it.
All right, is there anyone else that thought of something that they would like to share before we say goodbye to the Howard family?
Well, I think about the beauty of the place was where I lived was very hard to get to sometimes because it was later years, but we had a creek.
You're talking about your
Yeah,
childhood?
yes. Mhm. And that was sort of part of our fun during the time because when we had company, why, these girls, we'd find some old clothes and we'd go and sit in the creek. You
We
know, it
did
wasn't
that.
very deep, but if you sat down in it, you'd have water up to here. But you had to sit in it in order to get
We did
And-
that later too,
yeah.
so you
Yeah,
had
you
a
did.
creek later than
It's
after
the-
you married.
It's the same, yeah, even that one, you know, because we had crawdads or crabs, we'd catch them and cook them. And I went down there not too many years ago, and this is just a little stream now. It's practically gone.
The tiling has probably
Uh-huh.
taken care of that.
Yeah. There's fish in it.
Sometimes the creek was fun, but I remember a lot of times that it
Oh,
was,
yes.
there would be terrible floods, and then it would wash. Dad had always, a lot of times, planked the creek so you could drive across with a car. And the flood would wash it out, and we'd have to go down half a mile and find the plank, and it'd wash it out. And I think Dad never was glad to get away from the creek when they moved from that farm.
Now, he had to take me in a wagon. I had pneumonia when I was a kid. Remember, he had to take me, it was flooding, of course. It was in the spring when it was cold. He had to take me in the wagon, and then I had to stay in Elgin until I got better. But lots of times you had to get to town for something, and the only way you could get across was, I don't know, he must have had the Ford and a wagon,
Yeah.
because it was
Sometimes
washed
we
out.
used to-
It's,
But we played it a lot, went fishing.
I
We
went
used
fishing.
to go fishing.
Yeah, about every night after school, I'd go down and fish in that little hole and catch chubs.
Mom always thought we were going to drown.
Well, I think that as a family, you really have wonderful memories. We want to thank you